Hey gang, I'm Steak and this time I welcome you to a special episode. 100 facts about one of the greatest dictators in history, Adolf Hitler. In this two-part video you'll learn absolutely everything about Hitler, even things they definitely didn't tell you in school. At least, not until now. Okay, let's get right into it. Adolf was born on the 20th of April 1889 in Austria and came from a middle-class family. His father was an Austrian customs official. Originally, Adolf's last name wasn't supposed to be Hitler, but Schicklgruber. However, his father had his surname changed to Hitler. The only person Adolf Hitler truly loved was his mother. But her life was far from easy, because she had a strict husband, Adolf's father. He raised Adolf Hitler with a very strict hand and often beat him. When Adolf Hitler was a child, he liked to read in his free time, but he also enjoyed drawing. However, he was neither a good nor a hard-working student. His dream was to become a great artist. When Adolf was 18 in 1907, he moved to Vienna, where he wanted to study at the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. But he was not accepted there. It wasn't because he lacked talent or couldn't paint, but simply because he couldn't paint people. Most of his paintings were cityscapes. When Adolf wasn't accepted to the school, he lived in a men's hostel and made a living by copying postcards, which he then sold. Of course, this didn't pay much, so he lived at a low standard. From a young age, Hitler despised Austria and, in fact, the multinational Habsburg Empire. All his life he felt like a German, not an Austrian. Adolf Hitler spent most of the money he earned on opera tickets, especially for Wagner. He felt that Wagner's operas represented the Germany he dreamed of. A Germany full of heroism and great leaders. When he was 24, he fled from Vienna to Munich. He wanted to avoid military service, and he managed to do so for 3 years. But when Hitler turned 25, the First World War broke out. Moreover, nationalism became a major part of the European psyche. Hitler started to feel this as well, so he volunteered for the German Bavarian army. Adolf Hitler saw the war as a good thing because he thought it could make him famous. Moreover, for him, it was a kind of escape from his desperate life. In any case, Adolf Hitler was not some great killer or marksman in the First World War. In reality, he was just an ordinary messenger carrying messages from the barracks to the front line. That was basically his entire role in the army. Adolf Hitler learnt that the First World War had ended while he was in the hospital, and for him, it was bad news. Anyway, he was in the hospital being treated for an eye injury. At this point, Hitler was already beginning to feel aversion toward the Jewish population, because he started to believe a conspiracy theory created by the German army itself, claiming that they hadn't lost on the battlefield but had been stabbed in the back by the leftist civilian Jewish leadership to prevent Germany from winning. After the First World War, Hitler began blaming the Jews for Germany's defeat and started proclaiming his lifelong mission to ensure that Germany would be led to victory and a better future by Aryan Germans. The Munich army wants to keep track of what's happening on the far right, so they send Adolf Hitler to gather information about the scope of the German right wing. Thanks to this action by the army, he got into a meeting of the German Workers' Party, and when there was a discussion, he took the floor, and everyone present in the hall began to marvel. Because of this gathering, after 6 years he decided to leave the army and join the Workers' Party, because he saw potential in it. He originally joined the German Workers' Party as a speaker and began to build a reputation there as a great orator, developing his rhetorical skills. Hitler was a very skilled manipulator and managed to get into the heads of the masses by striking a chord of resentment and hatred which was plentiful in German society. In his speeches, he focused on various messages, and one of them was hatred towards Jews, who, however, made up less than 1% of the population in Germany. As he rose within the German Workers' Party, he managed to oust the original leadership and declared himself the sole leader, whose opinions would never be questioned. He transformed this party into the NS-Stab and established the swastika as the symbol of the party. Hitler claims that he invented the Nazi flag himself. The red symbolizes the Nazi Party's socialist goals, the white represents nationalist aims, and the swastika stands for the aspirations of the German nation. After his NSDAP party grew and everyone began to unite around his ideals, Adolf Hitler even established the paramilitary unit SA. This group used violence to target communist and democratic organizations that opposed them. And young people who didn't belong anywhere saw a purpose, action, and felt important to Adolf Hitler and his party. This was excellent for Hitler to further push his goals. In 1923, the Bavarian government held an assembly where they expressed their dissatisfaction with the national government. Adolf Hitler stormed in there with his SA units and told everyone that the government had been overthrown. It was his attempt to overthrow the government through an armed uprising, but in the end, the regular army and the police did not join Hitler. So, this attempted coup d'etat failed. In 1924, a trial was held with Adolf Hitler, during which a major turning point occurred. There, Adolf Hitler addressed the masses to highlight the dysfunction of the system, and he openly admitted to everything he was accused of. However, he does not portray himself as the villain, but instead points to those who, according to him, allegedly disgraced Germany. And he wants Germany for the Germans. At the end of this trial, Adolf Hitler said that they could send him to prison for high treason if they wanted, but that he did it for his country. This closing speech of his had a significant impact on the verdict, because he received the lightest possible sentence, 5 years in prison, with the possibility to apply for parole after 6 months. But in prison, Adolf Hitler was not treated like an ordinary inmate. He didn't have to wear any special prison uniform, and he even received loads of letters and packages filled with sausages, pastries, and other food. He even received love letters there. People could visit him in prison at will, and even during that time he remained the leader of the German Nazi Party. Adolf Hitler spent his time in prison productively as he wrote his autobiography Mein Kampf there. By the end of World War II, 6.5 million copies of this autobiography had been sold. In prison, Adolf Hitler is visited by a man named Rudolf Hess, who teaches him about an idea that Adolf then adapts to his own belief that Slavs are merely nations of bastards who shouldn't exist, and the Jews are subhuman. At the same time, he also returns to the idea that the magnificent Aryan German race will continue advancing eastward into Europe, building German cities and villages there. At the same time, Hitler realizes that Germany will no longer be conquered by force, but through the ballot box, and that he will essentially dismantle it from within. For this, he needs the support of influential and wealthy people. When Adolf Hitler was released from prison in 1924, he began traveling around various German villages and towns where he gave his speeches. Joseph Goebbels helped him refine those speeches. Adolf Hitler had a particular trick. He would arrive half an hour late to every speech, which managed to build up suspense. Adolf Hitler's speeches always had the same style. He would arrive late, remain silent until the entire crowd quieted down, and then he would start speaking slowly. He would gradually build up his speech until he reached the point where he was shouting and sweating. Even with crowds of influence supporters, Hitler didn't get more than 3% of the vote in the elections. In 1929, the American stock market crashed, and Hitler took advantage of this because the Germans were financially dependent on the Americans, which led to major inflation and massive job losses. The Nazi Party then started sending its people among ordinary citizens, and in the next elections, Adolf Hitler already had 18%. Up until then, Adolf Hitler hadn't had any relationships because he claimed he was married to his homeland. But in 1931, rumors began to spread that Adolf Hitler was involved with his niece. This was also a big topic for the press. Adolf Hitler was very domineering in this relationship. He decided for her what she should do, how she should dress, and it culminated in Hitler's niece committing suicide with Adolf's pistol. In 1932, Adolf Hitler tried to run for Reich President. He ran against the then President Hindenburg, but he lost. Then there were the Reichstag elections, where Hitler's party won 38%, making it the largest party in the Reichstag. But even so, there was still a problem because they still couldn't form a government, and Hitler couldn't become Chancellor since the Chancellor is appointed by the President, and Hindenburg hated Hitler. One of the ruling chancellors, Franz von Papen, realized that he needed to calm the situation, so he decided to enter into a coalition with Hitler and offered him the possibility of forming a coalition, but with von Papen remaining the ruling chancellor. However, he did not anticipate that Hitler would only join forces with him if he himself became the ruling chancellor. In the end, they agreed that Adolf Hitler would become chancellor, but the Nazis would remain a minority in the parliament. President Hindenburg reluctantly agreed to this and thus appointed Adolf Hitler as chancellor. But Hitler knew he would never be able to rule in peace, so he focused on destroying his opposition. First, with the help of the SA units, he began to forcefully suppress the Communist Party. In February 1933, the Reichstag burns down, and Adolf Hitler takes advantage of this. He presents a decree to the president for signature. This decree actually restricts civil liberties. When President Hindenburg signed this decree, he effectively abolished all civil rights. And this was essentially the first step to a dictatorship in Germany. Hitler believed that Jews were very powerful and manipulated both communism and global capitalism. So he declares a boycott of Jewish businesses. However, this boycott ended in an embarrassing failure for the SA units, and the SA's popularity dropped significantly as a result. The leader of the SA wanted to incorporate his unit into the army, but the army gave Hitler an ultimatum. If they did so, the military forces would revolt. And since Hitler preferred professional soldiers, he limited the power of the SA. At that moment, the entire SA organization was seen as a threat by Himmler and Goering, so they pressured Hitler to strike against the SA units. Prompted by this, on the 30th of June 1934, an event took place that is also known as the Night of the Long Knives. Hitler and the SS units launched an attack on the high-ranking leaders of the SA. It wasn't just military leaders who were targeted, but also longtime opponents of Hitler, such as the SA commander Ernst Röhm. He was given an ultimatum by Adolf Hitler. Either he would shoot himself or he would be shot. In August 1934, Reich President Hindenburg died, and Adolf Hitler almost immediately declared himself the supreme leader. He had people call him Herr Führer. This was the beginning of the Third Reich. Hitler had only one wife, and that was Eva Braun. He met her at his court photographer's studio, where she worked. Eva Braun was 23 years younger than Adolf Hitler, and Hitler made sure that Nazi Germany would not find out about her for as long as possible. Eva trained as a photographer and even shot home movies. Some of them can still be watched today. For example, they capture Hitler during his leisure time, playing with his dog or joking around with women. Despite all his actions, Hitler was actually a relatively lazy person. He liked to sleep in and get up late. After lunch, he usually gave out orders and received ministers, and after dinner he watched movies. However, Hitler himself did not issue all the orders, because his subordinates had to compete for his favour. He would only give his subordinates ideas, and then wait to see what they would come up with on their own. In 1935, Hitler and the Nazis began exerting pressure against the Jews by enacting the Nuremberg laws. For example, they stripped Jews of German citizenship and banned mixed marriages between Jews and Aryans. Since by 1936 Hitler had already coordinated the German economy and politics, he then turned his attention to foreign policy. For example, he sent troops into the Rhineland, thereby violating the Treaty of Versailles. By doing so, he indirectly began to threaten French military security. And he did all of this completely openly. Since Hitler wanted to show how peaceful and prosperous Germany was, he hosted the Olympics in Berlin in 1936. This Olympics was the first in the world to be broadcast live on television. After the Olympics, Hitler drafted a secret memorandum called the 4-Year Plan and appointed Goering as the head of a new office, the Office of the 4-Year Plan. The goal of this office was to prepare Germany for war within the next 4 years. Hitler even came to believe that he was the only chosen one who could lead Germany to victory. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, that's everything for the first part. And if you'd like a second part where we'll look at a bunch of other interesting facts about Adolf Hitler and maybe even World War II, you can leave a like here. In any case, you can check out more videos here, and I'll see you next time.